Willkommen zurück und wir werden jetzt bei den Medientagen das ansprechen, was wir im Audiosegment schon ein paar Mal adressiert haben, nämlich Voice Assistants, und wollen mal zwei Partner einladen, miteinander zu reden, aber erstmal eine kurze Einführung haben, und wir rufen an dieser Stelle Andy Webb von der BBC. Andy, I hope we find you sound and safe, and I say beep.
Guten Tag. Thank you.
I don't have any audio right now. I hope we can fix that in no time, and I guess we'll be there in a second, and we'll be able to hear you. We try it again.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Wonderful. How are you?
Okay, guten Tag. Yes, I'm very well, thank you. Pleasure
Andy,
to be here.
We're looking very much forward for your presentation. What is it all about with Beep? How far have you gotten with the program? Who are you partnering with? And what is the first user response? And then we will involve you in a dialogue with somebody who is trying a different path here in Germany. Please, it's your stage.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and welcome. So, for those of you that aren't familiar, the auntie is a term of endearment that we have in the UK for the BBC. We've been part of people's lives for close to 100 years, where they've been leaning on them. So the opportunity to really start to talk to audiences, because as broadcasters, we talk a lot to them, but we don't necessarily talk with them. So for us, exploring into voice is our first opportunity to really start to understand how to talk with audiences and not just to them. So the first question that we really started to look at was, how do we still stick to our core mission at the BBC? How do we inform, educate, and entertain in a conversational medium? And that leads us to a technology question then, which is how do we create a technology strategy to be able to enable this conversation with audiences? So we came up with this sort of 4-stage strategy, a really, really simple strategy that started off really over on the bottom left, and really it allowed us just to start to explore, but understand how we can start to grow to become sort of more and more involved within the voice space. So we started just out as a straight publisher, which was essentially, how do we take exactly what we already do now and just make it available to audiences within this means? So, that is essentially publishing onto our audio portfolio, onto services like Alexa and Google Home. So you can just say, Alexa, play Radio 1, and BBC Radio 1 plays, or you can ask for any of our podcasts or audio on demand experiences. From there, that's been a tremendous success. We've currently served out over 1 billion pieces of content via just the Alexa platform alone. So probably about 1.5 billion across all platforms all put together at the moment. Next, we moved on to how do we start to develop new experiences that really kind of wow the world a little bit on that. And that was really about how do we start to use experimental formats and content formats. So lots of that was, how do you start to produce interactive dramas? How do you start to produce sort of interactive experiences that audiences can engage with along with our broadcast content, but also things like how do we start to evolve services like news to become an interactive format as well. And then we moved into this stage that we're at now, which was, this is all good, but how do we start to maintain a direct conversational relationship with our audience? And that essentially involves building a BBC assistant. And there is a fourth stage that we haven't got to yet, which is how do we find other organizations that essentially have shared public service values with us that could also form part of that conversation as well. I think one of the things that voice really brings up is that we probably start to understand quite quickly that we don't have all the answers, and we're not necessarily always the right person to be talking or responding to a question with. So part of the difference between becoming a publisher and becoming a platform, obviously, is really about this element of control. And what do I mean by control? There's sort of two elements to it, really. The first is about this kind of attribution of content and the ability for your content to be accurately attributed back to you when it exists on a third-party platform. A good example of that is the ability to just say sort of like, Alexa, play Radio 1. There's no BBC attribution that sits within that. So that poses a big problem for sort of all publishers who are starting to look into this voice space. And the second piece is how do you really start to sort of balance that against ease of use and sort of discovery of your content as well. So when you start to look at the first part of that, you can start to see, we did a survey amongst our Amazon Echo users, people who use our BBC skill, and we know that they use our BBC skill, and we asked them, do you use the BBC radio skill? And because most of them just go through this this process of saying, Alexa, play Radio 2, play Radio 6, play the Blues Show, then they're actually seeing the attribution more go to Amazon than they are essentially seeing it come to us as a broadcaster. And actually 84% of people didn't realise that they're actually consuming a service that had been built by the BBC for them. Then we come on to this kind of balancing act that I discussed, which is this act between attribution and ease of discovery. Now, there are things you can do as a publisher that sort of help get you there. You can build your service in such a way that you have to say, Alexa, ask the BBC to play Radio 1, and therefore you get that extra attribution. Or you can have that way where you just sort of say, Alexa, play Radio 1, but you suffer from discovery problems and sort of ease of use within that sort of space as well. So this brought us on to Beeb, or Hello World, which is the BBC's own assistant, which we currently have in beta. We decided along at the initial road to go with sort of one technology partner that could provide us with all of the component services. What we didn't really want to build was a monolithic architecture. What we wanted to have was to control the whole natural language pipeline and to evolve to a place where we can put in best of breed components at each stage between speech recognition, natural language processing, natural language understanding, a variety of synthetic voices, and we can use them all depending on which context the user wants to speak with us. So at the moment, though, we decided to go with a one-stop shop, and Microsoft are our sort of partner with this, who could actually help us provide the whole kind of like end-to-end components that we'd be able to fit in and get out the door much quicker. So why did we really do this? Why did we kind of get there? What is the benefits case that having our own assistant really brings? But the first, of course, is around editorial freedom. That access to our content is not being mediated. That discovery of our content is not necessarily being mediated by a third party. And for an organization like the BBC, and for a lot of public broadcasters where we have different goals and different objectives compared to commercial organizations, editorial freedom is really important. It's what gives us our impartiality in things like our news coverage. Universality was another big reason for us to go and do this. It's, we don't want to be building one thing for one platform and then another thing for another platform and another thing for another platform. What we want to be doing is building one thing and then have a universal way of being able to scale that service as the number of voice assistants entering the ecosystem grows. And actually working in a principle of having our own assistant and making that assistant interoperable becomes better than trying to be a publisher on 10 or 15 different platforms, because you can't really build the consistency of experience across multiple different platforms because they all essentially have their own different interaction models, the way that users interact with the service. And ultimately, it gives us creative control as well. Creative control was sort of really important. I just alluded to this. It's, if you're telling your service in somebody else's language, then, really, you're starting to use somebody else's kind of brand identity, and all your content is doing is really supporting that other sort of platform's brand identity. It's not yours. This allowed us to be able to create a truly kind of BBC environment, to be able to talk about subjects in the way that we want to talk about them. Here you can start to see some of the sort of the other benefits that we really bring out and reasons why going through a standard kind of just publishing model really worked for us. So program titles. We have, programs in our portfolio such as sort of like Radio Nangadil. We have podcasts called Brexit Cast. very topical right now as well. These are non-standard English words and do not exist in a standard language models. And we actually have hundreds, if not thousands, of these words that are actually part of our content portfolio. And we must remember that people who do the naming conventions, the editorial naming conventions around this content, are not the same people that understand the challenges of sort of voice and disambiguation and speech recognition and natural language processing. Entity resolution is a key thing for us as well. We have key things that are sort of specific to us and our brand. David Attenborough, he's been one of our biggest presenters for 40 years. But David Attenborough is different to Blue Planet or Planet Earth, even though they are associated, even though they are related. The next US election as an entity. And this is all stuff that, because we're able to extract those entities out, we're able to sort of identify and pull back the most relevant piece of content to service that request. It also gives us control over things like dialogue management. And dialogue management is really where there are subjects where we want to have a really tight level of editorial control. As I said, for the first time, this means that we can actually talk with audiences and they can truly talk back to us almost in real time. So the narrative around how we talk around sensitive subjects becomes really kind of very important and something that we feel much more comfortable having within our control. The TV license fee in the UK is our main funding model. It is £3.5 billion of funding that supports, the BBC. So it is absolutely imperative that we talk about that in the right way. Because people can also talk to us suddenly about anything and we're not in control of what they say to us, things like how we manage very topical subjects like suicide, we need to have an extremely tight editorial control over that. So the ability to manage the dialogue as audiences now shift into this kind of conversational medium becomes really important for us. Personalization and recommendations, some of the other really big sort of subjects for us. Obviously, maintaining editorial control over this. We are a public service, and that is different to providing recommendations in a commercial organization, where it's naturally kind of driven about increasing revenue. For us, it is much more around how do we start to burst filter bubbles. In the UK, we have the saying is like, how do we introduce people to Shakespeare? It's like, how do we get people out of these kind of echo chambers and filter bubbles that they find themselves in with content? And ultimately, how do we get you to the right piece of content as well? If you think about the challenges in particular that natural language brings, you start to get nuances even between the various interpretations of English. Like, what is funny? If you say, recommend me something funny, what is funny to the West Coast of America is not necessarily what is funny to the UK with our quirky British sense of humour. And likewise, it's not going to be funny in Germany. Sometimes it may well be funny, but there is a lot of sort of nuanced difference between, in particular with regards to things like recommendations around show me something funny, the ability to disambiguate between what is drama and what is not drama. Like, is drama period or is it contemporary drama? So all of these play a big important part within personalization and recommendations. Discovery, what it's really kind of opened up for us is this new way in which we can start to think about discovery. So if you think about all of our existing digital services, they currently sit through a graphical interface, and we all have this concept of like a homepage. There is a start of this journey, and that is where people go, and that is where people discover content. But actually, what natural language facilitates is any interaction that comes to you can now be the start of a content journey. So even when someone said, how old is David Attenborough? I mean, the answer, and you can ask any voice assistant you like now, would turn around and say, he's 94 years old. But that's it. For us, this can actually start to be the first interaction that is a new discovery journey. He's 94. There was a podcast about his life on BBC Sounds. So, and there are literally now a million ways, every way that somebody can talk to the BBC can now start to be the part of a new discovery journey for our pieces of content. New forms of content. So this is an interesting one that, again, natural language provides us with this really key element that is, it provides us with an explicit feedback loop that comes from the user. It tells us precisely what it is that they want. So, you know, they may want to listen to Peter Crouch podcast, but they may only have, which is a 30-minute podcast, but they may only have a 15-minute window to be able to do that. So it enables us to work with new forms of content like object-based media, which is really where we take like a podcast or a TV show and we're able to chop it up into sort of 200 files, and we're able to sort of rearrange it into shorter or longer lengths to be able to suit people. You can easily see how that can be done with a subject like football, where they might talk about all of the leagues in the longer sort of podcast. But actually, if you've only got 5 or 10 minutes, you might just want that conversation shortened to sort of, you know, just the sort of top tier levels of football. Or again, news would be a really good example here about how you may only have 5 minutes in the morning and you want to catch up with the news, which would be much more focused around the headlines. But if you've got more time, you want a 30-minute version where you've got more in-depth analysis over the subjects, then, you know, you're able to take the same piece of content but just have a larger or a shorter version of it. And this is actually something that we've started now that is really sort of important for us as well, which is how do we take that natural language processing pipeline and start to deliver new services that are essentially based on the BBC Assistant and start to deliver value into our existing digital real estate as well. So a simple way you could think of that about that would, of course, be we could now support natural language search to be able to go within a search box. But one of the other projects we've been working on is a project called Project Songbird at the moment, which uses Beeb's synthetic voice to be able to start to deliver audio versions of our text-based articles. You know, at the BBC, we produce about 1,500 text articles every single day. And that sort of scales up hugely when you think about that we also support those articles in 42 languages worldwide as well. So we produce an enormous amount of online content to be able to do that. And the value that we can derive from an audio-based advertising model over our web real estate rather than banner ads on our web real estate is enormous. So you're starting to see these moves where services like Apple News are now starting to take audio versions of articles. So this is our first stage of how do we start to sort of scale audio versions of all of the text-based output, and how do we extract more value out of the journalism work that we've already done. So I think there should be an example where this is a live A/B test that we had on sort of bbc.com where we're doing this, and hopefully if I press next now.
The people with hidden immunity against COVID-19. While the latest research suggests that antibodies against COVID-19 could be lost in just 3 months, a new hope has appeared on the horizon: the enigmatic T-cell. The clues.
So it actually goes on to read like a whole 10,000-word article. So, you know, this is an enormous subject about what voice can do and what happens when you've got your own assistant and you can break down that technology stack. So, if anybody would like to know an awful lot more, we're happy to talk in much more detail about it. But thank you very much for listening.
Andy Webb, BBC Beeb, we're delighted. Please stay with us. And it's a whole universe we're talking about, I think, at the BBC. And ich bin, meine Damen und Herren, happy. Ich habe zum ersten Mal heute einen realen Menschen hier auf der Bühne. Es ist Tim Pfeilschifter vom Bayerischen Rundfunk und er ist für die ARD-Audiothek zuständig, eine parallele Geschichte zu dem, was wir gerade von Andy gehört haben, aufzusetzen. Und wir werden jetzt ein paar Worte über Aggregatoren und ARD-Audiothek hören. Und die beiden werden im Anschluss dann miteinander auch ein paar Worte plaudern noch. Bitte, Tim.
Danke. Ich freue mich sehr, dass ich heute hier sein darf, um so ein bisschen Einblicke zu geben in die Voice-Strategie der ARD. Und da fangen wir auch einfach direkt an. Bevor wir direkt in die Strategie einsteigen, so ein bisschen noch ein Hintergrund, der immer sehr hilfreich ist, um die Struktur zu verstehen. Das bin an der Stelle ich. Ich bin Tim Pfeilschifter, ich bin der Produktmanager für Voice im Bayerischen Rundfunk. Und mit ganz vielen anderen Kolleginnen und Kollegen im BR bilden wir das BR Voice-Team, das sich um die Voice-Strategie, Konzeption und Umsetzung innerhalb des Bayerischen Rundfunks kümmert. Und wir sind natürlich aber auch sehr stark verbunden mit unseren ARD-Kolleginnen und Kollegen und der Schwesteranstalt und kümmern uns auch da an der Stelle darum, dass wir eben eine möglichst gute Zusammenarbeit haben und dass wir auch dort auf ARD-Ebene ARD-Strategie, Konzeption und Umsetzung gemeinsam lösen können. Und, das ist auch an der Stelle wirklich sehr, sehr wichtig, dass wir einen sehr engen operativen Austausch mit den Kolleginnen haben, damit Erfahrungen geteilt werden und damit wir auch nicht die gleichen Fehler zweimal machen. Und ganz am Ende kommt noch die European Broadcasting Union mit dazu und da natürlich auch die Kollegen von der BBC, bei dem wir einen sehr engen Austausch auch auf der operativen Ebene haben, wo es aber wirklich darum geht, auf EU-Ebene zu schauen, dass wir auch da nicht die gleichen Fehler zweimal machen. Und dann schauen wir einfach direkt jetzt in die Strategie rein oder so einen kleinen Einblick. Ich habe das einmal aufgeteilt in Vergangenheit, aktuell und Zukunft auf der oberen Seite und einmal links nach den verschiedenen größeren Themen, den News, Livestreams, Radio bzw. Podcast und den genuinen Voice-Content sowie die Big Five. Die Big Five sind große digitale Inhalte der ARD. Darunter fällt zum Beispiel die ARD-Audiothek, die ARD-Mediathek, Sportschau, Tagesschau und natürlich die Kika-Inhalte. Wir fangen aber jetzt einfach mal oben links an. Oben links, was haben wir in der Vergangenheit gemacht beim Thema News? Das sind wir eigentlich angegangen, wie man das auch so aus dem Radio kennt. Wir hatten eigentlich gedacht, wir könnten einfach nur normale Blöcke aus den Nachrichten rausnehmen und die dann einfach auf die Plattformen draufbringen. Das hat auch am Anfang funktioniert, sowohl audiomäßig als auch visuell. Wir haben aber dann relativ schnell gemerkt, nachdem auch viele andere Provider auf die Plattform gekommen sind, so einfach ist es dann doch nicht und die Abrufe haben abgenommen. Deswegen haben wir versucht, noch spezifischere Nachrichten draufzubringen auf die Plattform. Zum Beispiel jetzt für die BR-Inhalte haben wir es geschafft, sind wir gerade dabei, auch noch lokalere Nachrichten draufzubringen. Oder zum Beispiel statt normalen Nachrichten auch sowas wie die Börse oder sowas wie Wetternachrichten. Und was uns da eben auch noch ganz wichtig war, ist, dass wir dieses Jahr eine kleine Studie innerhalb der ARD gemacht haben, um da möglichst schnell, möglichst groß auch Learnings zu sammeln, um zu wissen, wie die Leute eigentlich mit Nachrichten interagieren wollen. Und da kommen wir auch schon ganz wichtigen Thema, nämlich der Zukunft von Nachrichten auf Voice und auf Sprachassistenten. Und da sind wir wirklich bei dem Thema interaktive Nachrichten, Atomized News und Deep Dive. Wenn Sie heute auf jeden Fall was mitnehmen für die Zukunft, dann bitte das. Das sind wirklich zwei sehr wichtige Themen für die Zukunft, Deep Dive und Atomized News. Deep Dive kann man sich so vorstellen, man hat einen großen Nachrichtenblock, wie man den auch so kennen würde. Man kann aber an jeder Stelle der Nachrichten tiefer einsteigen, indem man sowas sagt wie mehr Infos dazu. Oder man kann einfach Sachen überspringen, indem man sagt, nächstes Thema. Und so hat man dann wirklich entweder ein 20-sekündiges Newsbriefing oder das Newsbriefing kann bis zu 10 Minuten lang sein. Das ist je nachdem abhängig von dem Nutzer oder der Nutzerin. Dann gibt es auch noch Atomized News. Atomized News bedeutet im Grunde, dass man den Nachrichtenblock nicht ganz reinschickt, sondern dass der einzelne Snippets nimmt und die sozusagen weitergibt. Und an dem Fall wäre es dann zum Beispiel so, dass bei Google Assistant Google die dann zusammenstellt, je nach Nutzerin oder nach Nutzer und der die dann einzeln ausgespielt bekommt. Das heißt, er hätte zum Beispiel die normalen Nachrichten von der Welt, dann hätte er die Sportnachrichten von BR24 und natürlich auch die Börsennachrichten von BR24, aber so, dass man theoretisch von verschiedenen Nachrichtenprovidern verschiedenste Informationen bekommen kann. Das sind so zwei große Zukunftsfelder bei dem Thema. Dann beim Thema Livestreams haben wir angefangen, indem wir einfach einzelne Radio-Livestreams auf die Plattform gebracht haben, sowohl Google Assistant als auch Amazon Alexa. Und sind dann weiter vorgegangen, indem wir die dann noch ergänzt haben und zusätzliche Funktionen. Das heißt, die Leute können nicht nur Radio-Livestreams hören, sondern zum Beispiel auch einen Podcast drüber abgreifen. Und da war es auch ganz wichtig, man könnte natürlich jeden Livestream, den wir haben, einzeln auf die Plattformen draufbringen. Da wir als ARD natürlich sehr, sehr viele Inhalte haben, wäre das aber ein sehr großer Aufwand. Dementsprechend sind wir da sehr großer Fan von Aggregator-Lösungen. Das heißt, es ist zum Beispiel dann ein Aggregator für Amazon Alexa, der diese gesamten Livestreams alle auf die Plattform bringt. Wir bekommen trotzdem noch Informationen darüber und haben uns auf jeden Fall auch Arbeit gespart, jeden Livestream einzeln draufbringen zu müssen. Und für die Zukunft sehen wir das natürlich so, dass wir versuchen, diese Livestreams, diese einzelnen Anwendungen noch zu verbessern und noch zu verstärken und noch mehr Nutzen sozusagen für die Nutzer damit reinzubringen. Und am besten Fall diese Aggregatorenlösung auch auf andere Plattformen zu bringen. Beim Thema Podcast sind wir eigentlich relativ ähnlich vorgegangen. Da haben wir auch angefangen mit Radio-Livestreams, wie bei Radio-Livestreams, einzelne Sachen auf die Plattform zu bringen, sind dann aber im nächsten Schritt auch dazu übergegangen, die nochmal zu erweitern, nochmal umfangreichere Funktionen draufzupacken, dass man eben noch spezifischer in den einzelnen Podcast zum Beispiel reinschauen kann. Und auch da ist es wieder diese Lösung für uns, die Aggregatorenlösung mit der ARD-Audiothek, die wir eben auch sowohl für Google als auch für Amazon Alexa an den Start gebracht haben. Und damit war es natürlich auch einfacher, dass wir nicht alle Podcasts einzeln auf die Plattform bringen mussten. Und für die Zukunft, da kann ich jetzt nicht so viel zu sagen, weil wir da gerade noch in verschiedensten Gesprächen sind. Aber da sind wir natürlich auch daran interessiert, dass wir unsere Inhalte möglichst einfach für die Nutzerinnen und Nutzer abrufbar machen auf der Plattform. Und jetzt habe ich über sehr viele Sachen gesprochen, die ja schon etabliert sind, die man schon kennt. Aber es ist natürlich auch so, dass es noch Inhalte gibt, die wir noch nicht produziert hatten davor oder die ganz neu sind und die wir auf die Plattform bringen wollten. Und es gibt ein wirklich sehr breites Spektrum an Inhalten. Aber jetzt einfach mal hier an der Stelle das Beispiel von Tag X. Das war ein interaktives Hörspiel, das wir im vergangenen Jahr veröffentlicht haben. Das kann man sich wirklich vorstellen wie ein Choose Your Own Adventure Buch von früher, Es gibt mehr als 100 verschiedene Szenen und nach jeder Szene gibt es verschiedene Entscheidungen, die man treffen kann. Und je nachdem kann man eins von 13 verschiedenen Enden erreichen. Und das war zum Beispiel ein Beispiel aus den vergangenen Jahren. Und aktuell sind wir dabei, auch eine Hörspielreihe draus zu machen. Wir wollen auch ein interaktives Hörspiel für den Tatort machen, sind aber auch dabei, sowas wie interaktive Wissensformate zu machen. Man erkennt an der Stelle, Interaktivität ist wirklich, wie es ja Andy auch vorhin schon gesagt hat, auf diesen Plattformen wirklich ein entscheidender Grund, sich damit zu beschäftigen. Und für die Zukunft hier ein Fragezeichen, weil es natürlich sehr abhängig davon ist, wie sich die Plattformen in der Zukunft entwickeln, was es da für neue Funktionen in Zukunft geben wird. Und schlussendlich noch die Big Five, von denen hatte ich ja vorhin schon kurz gesprochen, Sportschau, Tagesschau, ARD Mediathek und ARD Audiothek bzw. Kika. Da haben wir schon die Sportschau, die ARD Audiothek und die Tagesschau draufgebracht. Und jetzt sind wir gerade eben noch dabei, auch den Kika und im besten Fall die ARD Mediathek auch noch auf die Plattform zu bringen. Das war's von meiner Seite, so ein kleiner Einblick in das Thema Voice innerhalb der ARD. Und genau, falls es noch irgendwelche Fragen gibt, sind wir natürlich sehr gern offen und einfach gerne eine Mail schreiben.
Wunderbar, Tim Freistifter. Die Aktivitäten der ARD gebündelt hier beim Bayerischen Rundfunk, deshalb war der Weg relativ kurz. Ich glaube, ihr beiden wolltet noch ein bisschen miteinander reden, ne? Tim Freistifter und Andy Webb, wenn ich richtig informiert bin.
Gladly. Hi, Andy. Great to see you again. How are you doing?
Yeah, good to see you, Tim.
Cool. You talk a little bit about Songbird. Where do you see Songbird going in the next years?
I think huge. I mean, initially, you know, the A/B test we're doing at the moment is probably about 0.5% of our online web portfolio. And at the moment, it's really focused on sort of long-form feature articles that we're sort of going out and we're seeking sponsorship for. And that's actually been really successful for us so far. What we haven't done so far is get to the point of sort of getting it into our real volume services. You were talking about news and sport as being part, and they're obviously a big part for us too. So how can we start to take these this synthetic voice, generate audio versions of articles for services like sport, where we can really start to drive huge volumes of usage through it?
Yeah, okay, I see. So I think we are both employed by very big media companies. What would you think? How should smaller media companies approach the whole topic of voice?
I think I touched on it a little bit earlier. Really, that there's some piece for me that is about stay true to what you're doing in terms of like do what you do and see how that stands up on voice platforms first. You don't have to push the boat out. Don't try and do too many really outlandish, bespoke digital experiences. You really need to stay close to your core. I heard you talk about interactive radio. I'll be interested to sort of hear what you have to say afterwards as well. But for us, one of the best pieces of work that we did was we actually did an interactive quiz that was actually played by our DJs on our Radio 1 morning breakfast show. And it was tremendously successful. You know, Greg James would play along with his guests in the audience, and people at home could sort of play along too. And I actually think that's where you're going to be able to drive your kind of most media, kind of most marketing effort as well for growth, is using things like on-air broadcasters or on-air talent to be able to sort of like promote what you're doing. What would you say was your kind of big learning lessons, Tim, from what you did with interactive radio?
Well, probably one of the most important things were really basic things. For example, we learned that if you give people more than 3 options in an interactive radio play, they tend to always choose the last one because after 3 ones, they forget about the first one. And they think, well, I don't want to ask again. It's better to just use any option I can still remember. So very, very basic learnings we had there. And we learned not to use any pseudo decisions, which are decisions where you can say, like, do you want to go to place A or to place B? And if you go to place A, the interactive radio, interactive story tells you, well, you can't go to place A, go to B instead. So the interaction that are not really an interaction is not very helpful on the platform itself.
Yeah, I think we had some similar things, really, Tim. It was we did a lot. We've launched a lot of children's experiences, and I think one of the great things about understanding interactions and how well people will be able to interact with your services and your content through voice is actually to give it to children and see how they interact with it. And the lessons you learn from children will become hugely scalable up into that adult world as well. But we're the same, you are with a voice interface. It's not like you're able to present large lists back to people.
Yeah.
You're kind of your hero or zero really within that environment. So it's about crafting a great narrative that sort of leads people through the journey a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. It's really your job to make it easier for people to use your interactive experiences.
Und Andy Webb, einer repräsentiert die ARD, einer die BBC. Tremendous job, guys. Thank you so much. We enjoyed you sharing a piece of radio future with us, and we're in the middle of it, I think. Thank you so much. Vielen Dank. Und wir machen eine Mini-Pause und dann geht es weiter mit VNet. Das ist ja der Interessensverband der privaten Rundfunk- und Telemedienanbieter. Und die Wege aus der Corona-Krise wird dann unser Thema sein. Gibt aber ganz spannende Geschichte, neue Vorständinnen, neue Innovationen, neue Impulse dort. Und dieses Panel wird dann gleich die Kollegin Ulrike Simon moderieren. Bleiben Sie bei uns.